Hey everybody, Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the extraordinary honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist, producer, songwriter, and all kinds of stuff, Chuck Webb. Yay!
Hey, great to be here, man.
My pleasure to have you here, Chuck. For those of you that have been following us, and we've been around for a while, Chuck did an interview with our good friend Vujani out of Chicago about a decade ago. And there's a lot of interesting bits that are there that I'm not necessarily going to cover today because Chuck at the time had released his CD, No Smoke, No Mirrors, and he
Yeah.
was in a totally different space. And now he is with the U.S. tour for Hamilton and the Phillip branch. We can talk about how they divide that all up.
Right.
But now he's very deep into my favorite musical. So I'm really stoked to talk about things. But before I get to what is really interesting there, we always like to go to the past. How did you get started in music and particularly on bass?
Okay. Well, first of all, great to be here. I feel like I know you because I've seen so many of your interviews with my heroes on bass. So, it's a pleasure and an honor to talk to you, Raul. I will say that Jermaine Jackson
Mm-hmm.
was probably the reason I started playing bass. Like a kid, I was a kid growing up in the South Side of Chicago, and I started playing violin in first grade. Not my choice. My parents, said you do that. So I studied that for a little while, and then I played clarinet and bass clarinet in the high school, grammar school and high school bands. But I was always a Jackson 5 freak, and as a kid would have it, Jermaine to me was the coolest guy. And so he played bass. And so I was like, I want to play bass. And I convinced my parents to get me a bass when I was 11. And I haven't put it down since. I say
Nice.
I'm still trying to figure it out all these years later, but it's been good to me. So yeah, that was my start. And by me being into Jermaine, what I was really hearing was Motown and of course James Jamerson
Mm-hmm.
on all those Jackson 5 records. So that's really what got me into it. But later, I've seen videos of Jermaine when he was a kid, and he was playing on stage, when he was a teenager and singing and playing and dancing. So hats off to him. I wouldn't be here without him.
There you go. Now, you also pursued formal studies, I think, University of Miami, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, I went to U of M, and I started as a studio music and jazz major,
Okay.
and I did that for a couple of years, and then I decided to switch over to, at the time it was called music merchandising, which was basically a music business
Mm-hmm.
degree. So that's the degree I graduated U of M with, and I actually got a internship for CBS Records. So I went to New York and I interned at CBS Records for a summer, and I was in the point of purchase department. That's when they do all the marketing and the posters and whatnot. That's when records were a thing.
Mm.
And I was actually writing copy for promotions and all of that. And honestly, what I realized from that experience was I didn't want to be in that part of the record business, in that part of the music business,
Mm-hmm.
because I was a peon in those big board meetings. You imagine in the movies they have all the important people in the center desk and then all the people around the wall,
Mm-hmm.
right? I was one of those people around the wall, on those board meetings, and I realized that they could have been talking about truck tires
Yeah.
or widgets or springs or something. The way they were talking about music was strictly as a commodity. No bearing on artistic quality, none of that. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
how many units can we move here? How many units can we move there? How much money do we need to put in advertisement in this market? And it just kind of really honestly turned me off to that part of the music business. And that's when I really realized, yeah, I'm a musician, man. I want to play. I want to make the art. I want to make the music. So yeah, that was kind of a turning point. But I got the degree anyway.
Yes.
So I got that in my back pocket.
Nice. Well, and a lot of the prior stuff that I've heard from you was jazz. But again, you've got the Motown influence. So I've heard some funk work and all kinds of blend like that. And Hamilton is an extraordinary, and as I can't say it enough, it's one of the most creative pieces to come along for decades because, again, there's the classics from Broadway, that, everybody kind of recognized. And then in my opinion, and I may get some hate from Broadway people here, but there was kind of a period where like nothing new was really coming up, and they're kind of grasping at straws. And, the likes of, like, again, I'm not going to name any names, but things that you got to go, oh, did they really make a musical about that? That didn't seem right. And then Lin-Manuel came up with this amazing concept, but it is so musically complex. We had the pleasure of seeing it pre-pandemic. Jordan Scanella was in the pit at that time. And again, it was just impressive. And then, of course, during the pandemic, one of our, I'm going to call it our soul fixes, was watching it on Disney.
On Disney, right.
So because we could just try to catch details that we'd missed before, but it is just an amazing piece, but extraordinarily demanding. So how did you get into the tour? How did that happen?
Well, like a lot of musicians, I was a studio musician in Chicago for many, many years. And a lot of people don't know that in the 70s and 80s and a little bit into the 90s, New York was, of course, the big hub for records and whatnot. LA, of course, and Nashville. But Chicago was a big center for recording and primarily jingles.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a big jingle scene going on. And I was fortunate when I got out of college to get into that scene. So I was what you would call, and hardly even exists now, I was a studio musician. So I was making my living completely from playing sessions, so we would go. I remember my best day ever, I did 8 sessions in a day.
Oh, wow.
And it was just a miracle how things lined up. I started at 7 in the morning and finished like at 11 at night. So the reason I bring that up is because as technology advanced and producers and writers and advertising agencies realized that they could do a lot of the things that they were hiring live musicians for, they can do it in computers. That industry shrunk and shrunk and shrunk to the point where it essentially went away for studio players.
Gotcha.
And so what happened, I think it happened in New York as well. A lot of the best studio players pivoted into doing musical theater.
God.
Because that was a high-paying, regular salary, musicians union coverage, insurance, all of that stuff, and still musical. So I was able to make that pivot and started doing a lot of musical theater work in the late 80s and have been doing it ever since. In addition to, playing in my bands and all of that. So, yeah, I've done pretty much all of them. Wicked, Jersey Boys, Book of Mormon, Billy Elliot. All of those shows come through Chicago because we have a robust theater community.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been doing theater for a long time. So when Hamilton came out of New York and started touring, the first place they landed was Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And they did about a 3-year sit down in Chicago. And I wasn't on that gig, but I was the sub.
Okay.
So I learned the book, and so I've been playing Hamilton since it left Broadway. And I'll tell you a funny story about that, and then I'll get back to what you were saying. I think I answered your question.
Yes, you did.
Subbing on a show is a very challenging situation because if you're not the regular person, that they call it the chair holder, the chair holder gets to go through all the rehearsals with the cast, all that stuff. And you get to play it every night. So you get to, work out the rough edges. And after a while, you kind of have it on autopilot. But as a sub, you have to come in and recreate that same level of excellence, but you only get like one shot. You're like the pitcher that comes in, at the bottom of the ninth, with, bases loaded, and you're supposed to save the day. So I remember the first time I came in and I played Hamilton. I can't even tell you how many hours of prep went into just getting ready to play this first show. And there's so much music and it's so intense that when the intermissions happened, I felt like I had played a whole show. And I was ready to go home, man. I was ready for a beer and a drink and to go to bed. And I was like, oh man, I got to play act two. Oh, it was that demanding. Now being on the road playing at 8 shows a week, it's kind of, it's much easier now, but I'll never forget that experience because there's a lot going on in Hamilton in the bass
Gotcha.
book. Yeah.
Well, and it's one of the differences as we talked about other shows and this, and that is that Hamilton has virtually no paused conversation dialogue pieces. It is music from the beginning to the end. And so you have over 50 songs to wrangle.
Right. Right.
And you're switching sounds because they're very specific at how they want things to sound. So you have to be, as you are upright, you play electric. The upright has to have the low C extension. There's specifics onto the instruments that you can play. Adapting to that whole thing, you still have a little bit of what you bring because they're your own instruments and basses, but making those fit in the show. How did you do that?
Well, you practice a lot, first of all. I mean, you would shed your behind off. Yeah, Hamilton has probably about twice as many musical pieces as the average musical. So like you say, 50 pieces in Hamilton. I remember before I went on tour with Hamilton, I played Beautiful, the Carole King musical. And I think by the time we got to the exit music, we were on number 24. That was it.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of dialogue. But Hamilton, like you said, Hamilton is basically an opera through composed. There's only one section that has isolated, speech. Everything else is accompanied by music. And so, nuts and bolts. In order to play Hamilton, you have to play a 5-string electric bass because the low B is essential. I mean, pretty much every song you're going below an E in Hamilton on the basic songs. You have to have what we call a Beatle bass, a Hofnerish sound. It doesn't have to be a Hofner. I mean, some guys have played Hamilton, have used a hollow body, Lakeland. I'm using a Reverend, a semi-hollow body. So it's the sound that we want, like medium or short scale, flat wound, that kind of thing. Because it's like an old Paul McCartney type of thing. So you have that. You have a synth. You have a keyboard that you have to play on several songs. And then you have upright bass, which you play pizzicato and arco. And you have to have an extension because low D. Yeah. I mean, there's no D flats or C's written, but you need that extension for those notes. And they're, really important to the way the thing is composed. And, there's sometimes when you're kind of just funking out as a rhythm section. There's sometimes when there's a 4-piece string quartet. And then sometimes you're playing with the string quartet, so you make it a quintet. So you have to switch from being, a funk hip hop guy to playing, classical chamber music. And then you have to play synth bass. And sometimes there's one cue in the music where you play the electric bass, you play a slide, and you have one beat to hit a C sharp on the synth.
Oh, wow.
And then you're playing the next song on key bass. So the choreography of the show is very important, right? And you have a pedal board where you have 5 or 6 different sounds that you need to trigger. Some octave sounds, some chorus, some tremolo. You have amp simulation. When you play the hollow body bass, you have like a Ampeg amp simulation. So the choreography is a big part of the show. And for anybody that's aspiring to do any kind of musical theater, when you go in and it's called auditing. So you'll go into the pit and you'll watch the person play the show and you'll take your notes, right? You'll get an idea. Okay, this is what's happening. This is the way the conductor conducts, all that stuff. And then you go home and you practice your ass off. Sorry if this is a PG-13, but you practice your ass off.
Yeah.
And one of the key things that I learned early on is you want to set up whatever your home studio practice room, you want to set it up like the pit that you're going to go into. So if you're subbing, for example, the acoustic bass is on the left, the keyboard is either center or slightly right, and then your other two instruments are here, and then you have your pedal board in the middle. You want to set up that way because you need to, sometimes you have like 4 beats to
Wow.
go from this to this, step on the pedal, grab the bass, grab a pick. Oh, there's pick playing as well. A lot of pick and a lot of pick muting
Mm.
and thumb muting. So all this stuff is written in the show. I mean, it's like pretty much all the techniques of electric and acoustic bass are being used in Hamilton,
Wow.
except
And
slap bass.
no
But I know
slap.
some people put a little bit of it in. You can get away with a little bit of it, but it's not really a part of this show.
Gotcha. Well, and it makes an interesting point because I know they have a fixed way they want it to be, as it was originated from the early Broadway times.
Right.
But you have, it sounds like you also have a little leeway with some things. Like, again, you don't have to have a Hofner specifically. You need to have the Hofner sound. So specifically, what instruments are you using to be able to make this happen?
Okay. The Hofner sound for me is coming from the Reverend,
Okay.
semi-hollow, and it's a little longer scale. I think it's not a short scale. It's a medium scale. I believe it's a 32. And for me, that's much more comfortable. It's less of a switch, and so positioning is not quite as teeny tiny.
Yeah.
So that's that bass. I'm using a Lakeland 5560, a jazz style Lakeland bass, 35-inch scale as the main bass, and then I have a custom bass that was built for me by one of the Lakeland luthiers that I helped design. Carl Pettigo, shout out to Carl. He built me this beautiful bass that sometimes I'll switch out for the original, the other Lakeland, just for a change of pace because it's got a little different feel and whatnot. So that's what I've been using for the main electric basses. And then my good friend Andrew Taylor Cummings from Anaconda, since we're on that subject, just sent me to my hotel room in San Francisco this beautiful, his brand new designed Ultra PJ Essence bass. And this is a little different for me because I don't know if you can tell, it's a PJ setup.
Yes.
And I haven't played a PJ setup since my time. I was on tour with Al Di Meola for quite a while, and I was using a PJ for that. And foolishly, I let that bass get away from me. So yeah. If any of you guys, any of you people out there watching this video, if you have my red PJ bass, I'll buy it back from you. But anyway, yeah, I'm gonna actually tonight bring this bass into the pit and see how it sounds. A little different, a little change. And then my upright is an Upton.
Okay.
Upright bass out of Connecticut. It's a hybrid, so it's a plywood back and sides with a carved top with a C extension. With the individual stops. That's the interesting thing about that. I used to play with just one stop. For those that don't know, the stops are the little bars that you flip in order to go from E flat to D, da da da. And some basses, some extensions will just have a stop so that you can get an E, and then you open it, and then you have to finger actually on the extension the notes.
Gotcha.
So mine used to have just a D, just in the middle. So I'd have E, open it, D, open that, and then I have the low C. But for Hamilton, there's one song, it's called The Room Where It Happens, where you need an E flat. And it just became too difficult for me, during this song to actually finger the E flat. So I had to get multiple stops put on the bass. So I actually modified my bass. I took it to a great luthier in Chicago named Andrew Hassel, and he put 4 chromatic stops on the bass. Beautiful workmanship. So now it makes it 100% easier to play certain things with the chromatic stops.
Nice. And I believe there's another small modification you do with your Reverend bass for your Beatles set, right?
Yeah, there's a company called Nino Mutes. Nino makes the best custom-made rubber mutes. I think I have one, but yeah, this is one of Nino's mutes. This is for my 5-string, and basically it's rubber with the indentations for the strings at whatever string spacing. He'll make whatever string spacing you need. And there's different thicknesses. If I don't know if you can tell, but this one is kind of
Yeah.
angled. And so he makes different thicknesses and different configurations depending on how much muting you want. Like he calls it light thump or heavy thump or medium thump.
Hmm.
And then he's got some where it's more muting on the low strings than the high strings. I mean, he's like a mad scientist with this whole muting thing. So shout out to Nino at Nino Mutes. But yeah, I put that on the Beatle bass just to give it a little more, depth.
Nice,
Right.
nice. And because we're mentioning strings, do you have a preference in strings? Something that you like particularly?
Dunlop. I've been a Dunlop, player for many years, nickel wound Dunlop. And then recently I've also started liking Apex strings. I don't know if a lot of people know about Apex, but they make some really, really great strings as well. So I'll go back and forth between the Dunlops and the Apex.
This tour, you're currently on tour, and you're the San Francisco part right now, and it's
Mhm.
going to be running into about the middle of next year, so 2025. Because again, these
Yep.
videos will play for posterity, so people are going, "This is 2024. That'll be 2025."
Right.
And again, you'll get to enjoy many cities in the process. But what are your plans for the future? What would you think you'd like to be doing?
Well, the immediate future, the day after I get off tour, I start the Color Purple.
Oh, oh wow.
Yeah, I got called to do the Color Purple in Chicago. So I will unpack my bags. Hope that my main bass gets back because it's going to be shipped in a flight case in a trunk. But I have a feeling I'm not going to get it in time for that.
Mm,
So I have another bass that I'll use. So I'll do the Color Purple for a few months. And then I have a band that has been on hiatus for a while because I've been on the road. It's kind of a funk fusion jazz group called Guru Tonic. And we're looking forward to doing some concerts. We've already got some things booked for the summer of 2025. And I'm going to, work on that. Some new music is already in the can with the band.
mhm.
So just needs to be mastered. And so, when I get back, I'm going to work on releasing that and hopefully be able to play some creative music. I love theater work. I love playing the same show 8 shows a week, but sometimes you got to go and play something different. So
Mhm.
I'm going to be used to, look forward to getting out and doing some different things, some creative things, playing some jazz gigs around town and see what happens after that.
There you go. Well, and if people want to know what you're up to, including where you're going to be with Hamilton, where's the best place for them to look?
You can check out my website, chuckwebbmusic.com. I've
Hmm.
got links to all the Hamilton tour dates. You come and check us out. Hit me up on Facebook or Instagram, Chuck Webb Bass. I'm easy to find. And shoot me a message, say hello. And I'd also do lessons. In the pandemic, I really doubled down on doing lessons, teaching people about some things that I've learned over the years about reading and sight reading. I'm a retired professor. I taught for 22 years at Columbia College in Chicago, coordinated the ensemble program, taught private lessons, taught some ensembles, and kind of came up with some concepts about reading that are specific for bass that
Mm,
I think are really helpful and have really helped me over the years. And so do Skype lessons or Zoom lessons like that. So if you're interested in that, look me up. I
absolutely.
can get your reading together.
Very cool. Well, it to me again, the demands of Broadway are so intense and so specific. I think beyond even when classical, as we mentioned, or orchestral stuff, you're in a pack with a whole bunch of other instruments. It may not be quite as focused, but there you are. You're the whole low end in this show, so it is
That's right.
incredibly intense. If you had to share one particular pearl with aspiring Broadway musical theater kind of players, what would you tell them? What would that be?
Wow. If I was limited to just one, I would say learn to appreciate and learn to play as many styles of music as you possibly can. Even if you don't particularly care for country music, get into country bass, learn the nuances of what's involved with country bass or metal or whatever, because nowadays musical theater encompasses every possible genre of music. And you're expected as a theater player to be able to be authentic in many, many different styles. And the more styles you can play and come off, again, I use the word authentic, the more you will work. Right. So you have to know, you have to hear, you got to have that in your soul. What does a merengue bass line feel like? What are the key elements? You don't necessarily have to be a master at it, but you got to know what is a two beat. You know, you got to be able to play jazz. Sorry if you don't like, I mean, there are so many shows now that are, you know, Wonderful World, Betty Boop, all these shows, it's a jazz gig. You know what I mean? And so you got to be able to swing. You got to do that. And the other thing is, if you really want to work a lot as a theater player, you have to double. You have to play upright and electric bass. Yeah. There are shows where you can just play electric, you know, but nowadays the vast majority require the two.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and fretless. You know, like Wicked, there's some beautifully written fretless stuff in Wicked, and it's all the notes are there. So you got to read it and play it, and you got to play it in tune. Book of Mormon is another one that comes up to mind off the top of my head. Some killer fretless, like African fretless kind of Batiki Kumalo type stuff.
Oh yeah,
written in that show, and that's a musical theater show, but you got to be able to play that style. So again, you know, learn as many styles as possible if you want to do this work. Yeah.
Excellent advice, Chuck. Well, folks, as always, I encourage you to get out, support live performances. You know, as much as I love seeing it on Disney, get out
right.
And see the shows. That's what makes it so that we can continue to have these kind of things.
Absolutely.
And
you know what? Not to cut you off, but this is really important. I've got a lot of people that come up to me and say, man, I want to do, you know, pit work. I love that's so cool, blah, blah, blah. And I ask them, well, what was the last show you saw? And they're like, I haven't seen any shows. If you're not there to see and experience it, how do you know, right? Go to see a show. I know it's expensive, but, you know, find one that you really are interested in. Save your money. Go see the show. Come down to the pit. Wave at the musicians. Holler at them. You know, a lot of times I'm always, if people take the time to come and lean over in the pit and say hello and express an interest in my setup, I always want to talk about it, because this not only makes me feel like I'm sharing my love of what I do, but it encourages people to come. Because that's another part of the experience. Little kids will come down and say, oh, that's so cool, da, 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 da. And I talk to them about it, and who knows, maybe that's a future musician. So, yeah, come to a theater production.
Absolutely. Well, and if nothing else, if you could only go to one theater production, go to Hamilton.
Hamilton's a good one, man. It's brilliant. It's a work of genius. And I play the show every day, every week, 8 shows a week. And I'm still hearing subtle things. It's like, oh, the cello is doing this while I'm doing that, and you know, there's just so much involved. It's really a beautifully done, beautifully crafted, piece of work.
Absolutely, Chuck. Well, we appreciate you taking time for your busy schedule to chat with us. You've seen him here on Bass Musician Magazine, Chuck Webb.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.